Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight we bring you 6 terrifying tales that will make you question what's real and what should never be seen. From haunted forests to forgotten thrift stores, from whispering radios to creatures that rise from the lake. These are stories told by those who survived barely. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and remember, not everything that follows you home wants to leave. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. What my dog saw in the Redwoods. They say the Redwoods remember, that the trees whisper things if you stay quiet long enough. I used to think that was just poetic nonsense printed on postcards they sell at the ranger station. But that was before I moved out here alone, before I started walking the trails every day with my dog, before Bruno saw something I couldn't explain. It started the year after my divorce. I was living in a cramped apartment in Oakland when the silence became louder than the traffic. So I packed up everything I could fit in my old Subaru, took a job I could do remotely, and drove north. Found a tiny cabin just outside a town no one's heard of, surrounded by nothing but trees older than the country itself. That was what I wanted. Peace, solitude. The kind that makes your ears ring after living in a city too long. Bruno came with me. He's a big boy. Half shepherd, half mystery. Loyal to the bone and calm as still water. We made a habit of walking every morning down the fire trails that crisscross the state forest. It was supposed to be good for both of us. Fresh air for me, scent trails for him. That's all it was. For weeks. Just leaves underfoot and sunlight flickering between trunks that stretched toward heaven. But forests like these don't stay quiet forever. Some places remember things, and sometimes they decide to show you, or your dog first. It was in the 3rd week that things started to shift. At first it was small stuff, a strange tension in the air that made my skin prickle during certain stretches of trail. Bruno would slow down near mile marker 7 and sniff the wind with his ears flat. Sometimes he'd growl low in his throat, but not bark. I figured maybe it was a coyote nearby. This forest is full of them, or deer, or mountain lions if you're unlucky. I kept pepper spray on me just in case. But Bruno wasn't acting like he smelled prey. He acted like something was watching. One morning, I spotted something about 20 feet off trail. At first, I thought it was trash, a tangle of pale cloth or maybe plastic in the undergrowth. But when I stepped closer, I realized it was fur. A rabbit's pelt carefully removed. No blood. No visible injury. Just a perfect little skin laid out like someone had unzipped the animal and left it there. The meat was untouched. Flies hadn't even found it yet. 2 days later, I saw another. This time, a squirrel. Same deal. No gore. Just cleanly removed skin draped over a mossy log like a blanket. Bruno wouldn't go near it. He stood behind me with his tail down and refused to budge until I turned around and headed back. I asked one of the park volunteers about it the next day. She gave me a look and shrugged, said maybe someone was trapping. But her voice was tight and she changed the subject quick. That was the first time I noticed how quiet the forest felt. Not peaceful quiet. Hollow. Like something had cleared out the birds. Like the woods were holding their breath. After that second pelt, Bruno changed. My easygoing trail companion who used to trot ahead with a carefree gait started sticking close to my side. His ears were always up his nose, constantly testing the air. Some days, he'd stop dead in the middle of the path, refusing to take another step unless I turned around. One morning, he planted himself on the ridge above a small ravine and let out a single sharp bark. Not playful, not warning, something deeper. It rattled me more than I care to admit. Then came the night I woke to him growling at the front door. It was past midnight, and the cabin was completely dark. He stood rigid in front of the door, hackles raised, growling low and steady. I held my breath and listened, but I didn't hear anything outside. No footsteps, no branches breaking, just that awful stillness pressing against the windows. I checked the lock, peered through the glass. Nothing. The porch light flickered and went out as if something had passed beneath it. Bruno didn't relax until nearly an hour later. A few days after that, we took our usual route up the Fern Trail. It cuts through a denser part of the forest where the sunlight barely filters through the trees. We were about 2 miles in when Bruno stopped again, staring into a thick cluster of ferns. His body language was stiff, almost frozen, and his nose was twitching like mad. I followed his gaze and saw something move. Not fast, just a shift, a form. I couldn't tell if it was a person or an animal, but the shape was wrong. Too tall for a deer, too narrow for a man. It was standing just beyond the line of trees, half hidden. Then it vanished between the trunks, soundless. Bruno didn't bark. He just turned and started walking back slow and cautious, like he didn't want to run. And I followed. We didn't go back to that part of the trail for a few days. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a hunter in camouflage, or some tall trick of light between the trees. But the next Saturday, the sky was clear, and the air smelled like rain on cedar. And I figured we'd loop around that area, keep our distance. Bruno hesitated at the trailhead, something he'd never done before. But after a minute, he followed me in tails, low and quiet. About a mile in the forest, shifted. Not visually, everything looked the same, but the air felt thicker. The sounds dropped away. No birds, no wind, not even the rustle of squirrels in the brush. Just silence. Bruno stopped walking. He stood stock still, staring ahead. The fur along his back stood up like a warning flag, and his chest started to rumble with that deep growl I'd only ever heard once before. I followed his gaze and froze. There was something ahead of him, standing between 2 redwoods, maybe 30 feet away. At first, I thought it was a bear, but bears don't stand that tall, and they sure as hell don't wear fur like clothing. The thing was draped in animal hides, not in the way a person wears a coat, but slung over it like wet sheets. Layers of skin, coyote, rabbit, maybe even feathers all stitched or tangled together, hanging wrong. They didn't fit its frame. Underneath, I saw limbs that were too long, too thin. The skin beneath the hides was grayish and wet, looking like leather left out in the rain. Its head tilted slowly. I saw eyes looking through slits in the hide. Human eyes. Not wild, not beastly. Just eyes watching. It took a step forward, and the hides shifted, dripping in places. The scent hit me then. Copper and rot. Like death that hadn't decided what kind yet. Bruno made a sound I've never heard from him. A high-pitched whimper, almost like a scream. He pressed himself against my legs, trembling. The thing tilted its head again. And then it smiled. The mouth that opened wasn't human or animal. It was both. And it whispered something. A single word. In a voice like gravel dragged through water. I didn't understand the word, not really, but something in my gut turned ice cold. Bruno was shaking against me, unmoving, and I knew if I didn't do something, we wouldn't leave that forest. My hand shot to the bear spray on my hip fingers, fumbling with the safety. The thing took another step, and the hides shifted again. Beneath the top layer, I saw more other skins. A squirrel's tail, feathers, something like snakeskin, all fresh, all still wet. Then it spoke again, but this time it wasn't that grinding whisper. This time it was my own voice. "Bruno," it said, My voice, my exact tone. "Come here, boy." Bruno whimpered, confused, took a step forward. "No," I whispered, pulling him back. My heart was hammering. The creature laughed, a horrible rasping sound that mimicked my laugh too. Then it rushed forward, all jerking limbs and trailing hides. Bruno bolted, and I followed without thinking, sprinting back down the trail. I didn't look back, just ran, hearing branches snap behind us, that horrible mimicry echoing in the trees. Laughter, my voice, calling Bruno over and over. I ran until the forest opened up again, until I saw the trailhead and the road beyond it. Bruno didn't stop running until we were back at the car. He leapt into the back seat without waiting for me to open the door all the way, and I slammed it shut behind him. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I didn't look back at the woods, not once. I drove straight home, locked every door and window, and slept with the lights on for the first time since I was a kid. The next day, I called a local wildlife officer and reported a possible mountain lion sighting. It was a lie, but the closest one I could tell. He nodded like he knew something and told me to avoid that part of the trail. I still walk with Bruno, but never near the ravine, never where the trees grow too thick. I don't talk about that day with anyone. But sometimes, late at night, Bruno growls at the window again. And sometimes from the woods, I hear my own voice whispering his name. Story 2. The freezer that wasn't empty. They told me the northern outpost would be quiet, peaceful, a perfect place to rack up some hours in solitude while I cleared my head from the mess I left back home. The station was tucked deep into the Absaroka wilderness, a little ranger cabin built decades ago, now used mostly by seasonal hires like me. It sat about 15 miles off the nearest paved road, surrounded by pines so thick the sun barely touched the forest floor. No power lines, no cell signal, just a radio and a satellite phone that only worked when it felt like it. I took the assignment because I needed the silence. Too many arguments, too many sleepless nights with a bottle in my hand. I thought if I could get away from everything, maybe I could remember how to breathe. The work was easy enough. Basic trail maintenance, check weather stations, make wildlife reports, keep the cabin stocked and the logs updated. The cabin came with a small generator, a wood stove, and a freezer half filled with ranger rations. It also came with a warning from the last guy who used it. He left me a note taped to the fridge. Do not feed anything that is not you. At the time, I figured it was a joke. Something dumb to mess with a new guy. We all do it. A little cabin fever hazing. I even laughed. But that was before I noticed things missing from the freezer. And before I found something had been left in its place. Something that was not food. And definitely was not mine. The first week passed without incident. I settled into the rhythm of it, early mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons hiking out to check trail markers or record animal sightings, and quiet evenings with a book by the wood stove. The silence was thick, but not uncomfortable. The kind that wraps around you like a blanket. I almost forgot there was a world outside the trees. It was on the 9th day that I noticed the freezer wasn't how I'd left it. I remembered clearly placing 3 vacuum-sealed chicken breasts in the back corner before heading out for a long hike. That evening, I opened the lid and found only 2. At first, I assumed I'd miscounted. Maybe I'd eaten one already and forgot. Long days can make your mind blurry out there. But the next day, a granola bar from the pantry disappeared. The day after that, a can of beans. Always just one item, nothing major, but enough to feel wrong. I did a full inventory of my supplies, and started marking down what I used each day. I checked the locks on the doors and windows, made sure nothing had been left open. Everything was secure, no scratches, no signs of forced entry. But the food kept vanishing, always small things. Then on day 12, I opened the freezer and found something new. Resting on top of the last 2 frozen chicken breasts was a small object wrapped in wax paper. I unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a rabbit's foot. Fresh, pink, not cooked or cleaned, just left there like a gift or a message. I stood there for a long time, holding it in my gloved hand, listening to the silence pressing in from all sides. The trees felt closer than before, the air heavier, and I realized I was not alone. I tossed the rabbit foot into the fire that night, watched it shrivel and blacken, giving off a smell that clung to my clothes long after the flames died down. I told myself it was probably an animal. Maybe a fox or raccoon had found a way in, though the locks were intact and nothing else in the cabin had been touched. Still, I set up a motion sensor outside the back door just in case, and I kept a hatchet beside the bed. 2 days passed without incident. I started to relax again, thinking maybe it had been a fluke. But on the 3rd morning, I opened the freezer and froze. Another item had appeared. This time it was a strip of bark folded neatly and tied with sinew. I opened it carefully. Inside were what looked like crushed berries, dark red and sticky, mashed into a pulp. Nestled within the pulp was a single button, old, bone white. It looked hand-carved. That same afternoon, I realized 2 of my protein bars were gone. It became a pattern. Every time something disappeared from my stash, something else showed up. Once it was a tuft of animal fur, still damp with something I didn't want to identify. Another time, it was a bird skull painted with red markings I'd never seen before. Always left in the freezer, always cold, as if whoever or whatever brought them had chilled them before offering them up. The worst part was the feeling. Not fear exactly, not at first, but a growing sense of being watched, of being studied. The trees no longer felt like a comfort. They pressed in on the cabin now, looming and silent. At night, I thought I heard footsteps on the porch, just 1 or 2, never enough to be sure. I told myself it was the wind. I told myself a lot of things. But the offerings never stopped, and the food kept vanishing. It wasn't until the motion sensor light stopped working that I truly began to unravel. One morning, I found it tilted sideways, like something had smacked it hard. Batteries were fine. It just wouldn't turn on. That night, I barely slept. I left a lantern burning near the window and kept the hatchet under my pillow. Every creak of the cabin, every groan of the wind felt like a whisper of warning. Something was out there, or in here. On day 17, I found the crawl space door cracked open. It was behind the wood stove, a small square cut into the floor with a latch you could only lift from the inside. I hadn't touched it since moving in. Had no reason to. The space beneath the cabin was barely high enough to crouch in, used for plumbing and storage back in the day. The idea that the latch could be opened from below made my stomach turn. I crouched down, pulled the door all the way up, and aimed my flashlight inside. What I saw turned my blood to ice. There was bedding. Nestled in the dirt was a pile of old blankets and pine boughs, like a makeshift den. Around it were small piles of bones, rabbit, squirrel, maybe even raccoon, arranged in patterns. Some wrapped in strips of cloth, others tied with sinew, just like the bundle I'd found in the freezer. And tucked into one corner was something that made my throat close. It was one of my missing protein bar wrappers, crumpled and licked clean. I didn't hear anything behind me, but I felt the shift in air. A change in pressure, like something breathing very slowly nearby. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Every instinct I had screamed to close the crawl space and back away slowly. So I did. I shut the door, gently stood, and walked backward across the room. Hatchet still in hand. That night I didn't sleep. I didn't even sit down. I stood by the window watching the trees. The generator hummed like a heartbeat, and the forest pressed in all around me. The silence wasn't just silence anymore. It was listening. And something beneath my floor had been waiting a long time. The next morning, I packed my things. I didn't care that my rotation had 2 weeks left. I didn't care about protocol or field logs. I wanted out. I stuffed everything into my pack, grabbed the satellite phone, and left a quick message to base saying I was heading down early due to equipment issues. A half-truth was easier than trying to explain what I didn't fully understand myself. Before locking the cabin, I forced myself to open the crawl space one last time. I had to know if it was still there, whatever it was. But the bedding was gone. So were the bones. The space was clean, almost too clean, like it had been swept. But in the soft wood along the interior wall, I found it. Scratched into the timber in uneven, shaking letters were the words, "Thank you for sharing." And underneath that, in smaller writing, more next time. I stared at those words for a long time. There was no rush, no footsteps, no final jump scare, just silence. Pure and patient. I closed the hatch, left the cabin, and didn't look back. I never took another remote post, and I never kept another freezer. Back in town, I turned in my keys and filed the paperwork without a word. No one asked questions. Most people who work the deep cabins come back different anyway. I rented a small place near the edge of the park and tried to forget. But some nights, I still hear the silence. The real kind. Not absence of noise, but that heavy watching stillness that only exists in old forests. A month after I left, a new ranger took over the post. He lasted 6 days. Quit without explanation. Left in the middle of the night and drove straight to Denver. No one talks about it, but word travels fast out here. The cabin remains unstaffed now. Officially, it's under maintenance review. Unofficially, people just avoid it. Sometimes, late at night, I still wake up and check my kitchen. Not for intruders, not for food, but for anything left behind. A gift, a trade, a message I never want to read again. Story 3. The thing that crawled out of the lake. I hadn't been back to the lake house in over 15 years. Not since Jacob drowned. My parents sold the place soon after, unable to stand the weight of what had happened there. But they left it to me in their will, a final gift wrapped in quiet grief. I almost didn't go. Thought about selling it sight unseen, letting some stranger turn it into a vacation rental. But something pulled me back. Maybe guilt, maybe something deeper. The cabin hadn't changed much. The porch still sagged in the middle, the windows still rattled in their frames. Dust clung to every surface like memory. I didn't touch Jacob's room. Couldn't. It was too quiet. I spent the first night on the couch listening to the sounds I'd grown up with. Wind in the pines, water lapping against the dock, the distant hoot of an owl. For a moment, it almost felt like nothing had changed. But then just past midnight, I heard it. A small splash. Light, like something had climbed out of the water. I sat up, heart thudding, and moved to the window. The lake was still. No ripples, no boats, no animals. Just that same soft sound, as if something had broken the surface and was now waiting, watching. I told myself it was just a beaver or a deer. But I remembered something Jacob used to say when we were kids. The lake doesn't want to let go. It keeps things. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I walked down to the dock with a thermos of black coffee and a head full of ghosts. The air smelled like wet pine and old algae. And for a moment, I could almost see the two of us as kids, barefoot and sunburned, daring each other to jump in, even when the water felt like ice. Jacob had always been the brave one. I was cautious, the watcher on the shore. I hated that about myself for years after he was gone. I stood there staring at the still water, trying not to think about that day. But memories work like ripples. One touch and everything spreads out. I remembered the way Jacob used to race his little toy boat along the edge of the dock. It was yellow with a red stripe cracked along the side, but always floating true. He used to pretend it was on secret missions, whispering stories while he pushed it through the reeds. That afternoon, I saw it. The boat. It was just there, bumping gently against the end of the dock, like it had never left. The same red stripe, the same cracked hull. But that was impossible. We had never found it after Jacob disappeared. The rescue team had searched the whole lake. They never found anything. And yet there it was, floating like it had been placed there on purpose. I stepped back, nearly spilling my coffee. No one else should have had access to this property. No neighbors, no recent visitors. I walked around the entire cabin looking for footprints, tire tracks, any sign of another person. Nothing. That night, I heard it again. Splashing. But it wasn't soft this time. It was heavier, like someone walking in the shallows. Then came the giggle. A child's giggle. And I knew that sound. Jacob had laughed like that when he was hiding, when he wanted to be found. I didn't go outside that night. I just sat at the kitchen table with all the lights on, every curtain pulled tight, staring at the dark window above the sink. I kept telling myself it was a dream, a memory surfacing in the form of sound. But I knew better. Some part of me had known since I saw that boat. Jacob was dead. I had accepted that. But something was here. Something that remembered him too. The next morning I found the footprints. They started at the edge of the dock and trailed up toward the cabin. Bare feet, small, child-sized, pressed clearly into the damp earth as if they'd just been made. I followed them slowly, heart pounding, until they stopped right at the front steps. But they didn't go up the stairs. They ended there, like someone had just stood waiting. I didn't call the police. I couldn't imagine what I'd tell them. Instead, I cleaned the prints, tried to convince myself they'd been old, somehow preserved. But later that afternoon, when I went back inside, I found something that broke me. The toy boat was sitting on the kitchen counter, still wet. And then I heard the voice, soft, muffled, like it was coming from underwater. It said my name, not shouted, just spoken, once. I ran outside and stared at the lake. Nothing moved, no ripples, no sign of life. But I couldn't shake the sound. It wasn't just a voice, it was Jacob's voice. Not the voice of a boy like I remembered, but deeper, older, like it had kept growing without a body. The wind picked up and the pines rustled like whispers. I thought about leaving then, packing up and never coming back. But the guilt kept me rooted. If it really was Jacob, some part of him, I owed it to him to stay. Or at least to understand what he had become, what he had. That night, I sat on the edge of the dock with a flashlight in one hand and Jacob's old toy boat in the other. The air was cold enough to sting, but I didn't go inside. I was waiting. For what I didn't know. Maybe proof. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe just an ending. The lake was still as glass, moonlight streaking across its surface like a scar. Around midnight, the silence broke. First with a ripple, then with a slow, deliberate splash. Something was rising. I stood up, heart hammering, and aimed the flashlight toward the sound. At first I saw nothing, just water and reeds and drifting mist. But then it stepped forward. It looked like Jacob. From a distance in the fog, it could have been him. Same height, same frame. But when it moved closer, I saw it for what it truly was. Its skin wrung loose in places and stretched too tight in others. Parts of it looked raw, unfinished. The face was almost right, almost him. But the eyes were too deep, the smile too wide. And the voice that followed wasn't just familiar, it was wrong in a way I could feel in my teeth. "Come swim with me," it said. Jacob's voice echoing with something beneath it. Something older. I couldn't speak, couldn't run. My feet felt nailed to the dock. It stepped onto the wood, and the boards groaned under its weight. Water dripped from its fingers, long and pale. It took another step and held out its hand palm up, just like Jacob used to when he wanted to share something he'd found. In its hand was a photo. Us, taken the summer before he died. We were sitting on this very dock. My knees buckled. I dropped the flashlight, and the beam spun wildly before hitting the thing's face. That was when I saw the mouth open fully, far too wide, revealing not teeth, but rows of something black and sharp. It didn't scream. It didn't lunge. It just waited. Still smiling, still holding the photo like a memory trying to pull me back into the water. The thing took another step, slow and deliberate, and the water from its body pooled at its feet. I could hear it breathing now, shallow and wet, like air passing through flooded lungs. It tilted its head and spoke again, softer this time, almost pleading. "Come swim again," like before. My throat tightened. That phrase, Jacob used to say it every summer when he wanted to race me to the deep end. I hadn't heard those words in years. But now they came from something that wore his shape, like a mask. I looked at the photo in its hand, and back into those eyes that reflected no light. And for a moment I felt a pull. Not physical. Something deeper. Emotional. A thread between guilt and grief and the desperate hope that maybe somehow he had never left. But I knew better. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't Jacob. I stepped back, shaking my head. "No," I whispered. "You're not him." The smile vanished. The creature let the photo fall, and it landed face down on the wet wood. Then slowly it turned and stepped off the dock, disappearing into the black water without a sound. The next morning, I burned the photo. Not out of anger, but as a release. I watched the edges curl and blacken in the fire pit beside the cabin, the image of two brothers smiling slowly, turning to ash. Then I walked to the dock and pushed Jacob's toy boat out into the lake one final time. It drifted a little, then sank without a ripple. I stayed until the sun rose, fully warming the mist off the water. The lake was quiet again. Whatever had crawled out had gone back. And I knew now, so had he. Story 4. He wouldn't stop coming in. The summer before everything changed, I took a seasonal job at a general store near the entrance of Glacier National Park. It was the kind of place hikers stopped in for trail mix and bear spray, with wood-paneled walls and an old bell that rang every time someone opened the door. I'd just gotten engaged that spring. His name was Alex. We were planning a quiet wedding in the fall, something small under the trees with close friends and coffee instead of champagne. The job was simple. Stock shelves, run the register, make small talk with campers and the occasional park ranger. It was the kind of work that let your mind wander, which I appreciated. I spent most days thinking about colors for the ceremony or where we might go for our honeymoon. Then he started coming in. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair and the kind of quiet confidence that makes people step aside without knowing why. The first time he bought a trail map and a bottle of water. Nothing strange, just another customer. But he came back the next day. Then again, the day after. Always when I was working. He never bought anything important. A granola bar, a single lighter, a pack of gum. Just enough to make conversation, always with compliments. Polite at first, casual. You have a nice smile. This place feels warmer with you behind the counter. I smiled back the way we're trained to. Professional, kind, but distant. I mentioned Alex whenever I could. Wore my ring like armor. But some people only hear what they want. And some come back even when you tell them not to. By the second week, I started to dread the sound of the bell over the door. He always came in late afternoon when the sun was low and the shadows in the store grew long. At first, it was just more of the same. Casual comments, lingering glances. But then, the tone shifted. Subtle at first. He stopped calling me Miss and started calling me beautiful. Asked if I liked surprises, if I believed in fate. I laughed it off, kept my tone light, but my hands started shaking every time I counted the till. One day I found a folded piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. You look happiest when you're alone. Maybe we should fix that. No name, no number. Just that line handwritten in neat cursive. I showed it to my manager, who offered to walk me to my car after shifts. We didn't call the police. There wasn't a threat, just suggestion. Just a feeling. Then the gifts started. A flower left on the register. A charm bracelet placed carefully on the counter. Once a book I had mentioned liking during small talk. That one scared me most. I'd only said it once in passing. He had remembered. I started switching shifts, taking mornings when he usually came in late. But he adjusted too. One evening, he came in just before closing, looked around and smiled when he saw I was alone. I locked the door the moment he left and cried in the back room. Alex noticed the change. He asked if everything was okay. I told him some guy was being weird. Nothing serious, just a little too friendly. He offered to come by the store. I told him not to. I didn't want to escalate things. But it was already escalating. I just didn't realize how far it would go. Not yet. Not until it was too late to stop it. It was a Saturday afternoon when everything finally cracked open. Alex had the day off and decided to surprise me with lunch. He showed up around 1, smiling, holding 2 sandwiches from the deli down the road. He kissed me at the counter right in front of a few customers. I remember laughing, telling him he didn't need to drive all the way out just to bring me food. But secretly, I was glad he came. It felt safe for the first time in days. We ate in the back room, legs tangled under the tiny break table, talking about wedding plans and arguing over whether we should let my uncle give a speech. He kissed me again before leaving, saying he'd start dinner early. I watched him walk out the front door, heart full. Not even 20 minutes later, the bell above the door rang. It was him. His expression was different this time. Not charming, not playful. His smile was tight, eyes hard. He walked straight to the counter and placed a single energy bar down, then looked me in the eye. "So, that's him," he said quietly. "That's what you're choosing over me." I froze. "You need to leave," I said, voice shaking. I reached for the phone on the counter. He leaned forward, elbows on the glass. He made a mistake. At that moment, Alex walked back in. He had forgotten his car keys. I remember him smiling at the man, polite and casual, asking me if I had seen them. The man didn't speak. He picked up a metal water bottle from the shelf. And then, without warning, he swung it hard. It hit Alex in the side of the head. A terrible, wet sound. Alex collapsed instantly, the back of his skull smacking the floor. Blood spread across the tiles like it had been waiting. I screamed. The man dropped the bottle and calmly walked out. No rush, no panic. I knelt beside Alex, pressing my hands to his head, sobbing, begging him to stay with me. The bell over the door rang one final time as it closed behind the man who wouldn't stop coming in. Alex spent 5 days in the hospital. A fractured skull, a severe concussion, swelling in his brain that had to be monitored hour by hour. I stayed by his side, holding his hand, whispering apologies he couldn't yet hear. When he finally opened his eyes, I cried so hard I thought my ribs would crack. But the joy didn't last. The police caught the man within hours. He had a prior record, restraining orders, assault charges that had been pled down or dropped. He didn't resist arrest, didn't say a word. But when they searched his belongings, they found something that made my blood run cold. A map. It was hand-drawn rough, but unmistakable. Our rental cabin in the woods, where Alex and I had planned to spend our honeymoon. The trail leading to it. Notes about which days I worked late, when Alex usually left for his job. There were sketches, too, of me, sitting behind the register, smiling. Notebooks filled with imagined conversations, fantasies where we were already together. Married, happy. He had been watching more than I ever realized. The store, my social media, our future plans. He hadn't just been obsessed. He had been preparing. And I had been trying to handle it with politeness, with distance. As if logic could stop a man who thought he already owned me. Alex survived the attack. But something between us didn't. Something we could never quite recover. Alex came home after 3 weeks and moved differently. Slower, cautious. He winced when the lights were too bright or when loud noises echoed off the walls. I did everything I could. Cooked, cleaned, managed the legal process, sat through court dates, answered police calls, canceled our wedding venue, returned the dress. He said thank you a lot, always politely. But he never touched me the same way again. At first, I thought it was the trauma, that time and healing would bring him back. But then came the questions. Quiet ones edged with something sharp. Why didn't you tell me how bad it had gotten? Why didn't you go to the police sooner? Did you ever tell him directly to stop? I tried to explain how women are taught to stay polite, how we are warned not to provoke, that I had done everything I thought was right. But Alex didn't see it that way. He said he felt betrayed, that he should have protected me, that I should have let him. I understood. I really did. But it still broke me. One night he packed his things without speaking. I asked where he was going. He said he didn't know. Just away. Somewhere quieter. He left me the cat we adopted together. Said I was better with her. I stood in the doorway watching his car disappear down the gravel road and felt something tear clean in two. Not just us, but who I used to be. Before all of it. Before him. Before fear. Before loss wore my name like a second skin. People told me it wasn't my fault. My therapist, the officers. Even Alex in one of the last messages he ever sent. They all said I couldn't have known. That I had done what most people would have done. But the guilt doesn't listen to logic. It has its own voice, quiet and steady, whispering at night. When the world goes still, I replay everything. The polite smiles, the missed chances to speak louder, the moments I chose to be careful instead of forceful. I know now that it wouldn't have mattered, that some people do not stop because you say no. They stop because they are made to. I carry that lesson with me tucked between my ribs where no one can see. I sleep with a light on now. I keep my doors locked, even during the day. And when the bell rings at the door of the new store where I work, I never assume the face on the other side is harmless. Story 5. The Children in the Fog. I had been driving trucks for nearly 20 years and thought I had seen everything the road could throw at me. Tornadoes in Kansas, black ice in Montana, deer leaping out of nowhere in the middle of the night. But nothing prepared me for what happened on that mountain road in Oregon. It was late October, and I had taken a last-minute job hauling camping supplies up to a ranger station near the Cascades. It paid well, but the route was a mess. Steep grades, tight switchbacks, and no guardrails in places where they should have been. Worse than all that was the fog. Thick, low, and heavy like soup hanging in the trees. It swallowed my headlights whole. About an hour into the climb, the engine sputtered. Then it died completely. No warning. 1 second I was cruising uphill, the next I was coasting completely powerless. I managed to steer onto the shoulder and came to a stop beside a crooked mile marker. Tried the ignition, nothing. Checked my phone, no signal. Of course, that whole stretch was a dead zone. I sat in the cab staring into the white wall of fog outside the windshield. It felt too quiet, like the truck had been swallowed by something. I told myself I would wait 15 minutes. Someone would come. A ranger, another trucker, anyone. But in those woods on that road, 15 minutes felt like forever. And then I saw the first shadow shift at the edge of the trees. Small, still, waiting. At first I thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, or one of those mountain foxes. But when I leaned forward and squinted through the fog, I saw the shape more clearly. It was not an animal. It was a child. Small, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Standing completely still just off the side of the road in the clearing where the tree line broke. She wore what looked like a school uniform, a plaid skirt and a dark sweater, pale legs beneath. No jacket, no backpack. Just standing there, hands at her sides, facing the truck. Then another one appeared beside her. Same size, same clothes, same strange stillness. They did not speak. They did not move. I opened the window slightly, just enough to call out. "Hey, you girls okay?" No answer. My stomach was starting to turn. There was no way kids that young were out here alone. Not this deep into the forest. Not in this kind of cold. I opened the door and stepped out. The fog clung to my clothes immediately, damp and heavy. I walked to the front of the truck, keeping my eyes on the figures. They hadn't moved at all. I was about to call out again when they both turned toward me in perfect sync. Not slowly, not naturally. Just a single smooth movement like puppets pulled by the same string. The girl on the left raised her hand. "Sir," she said in a flat, formal voice, "may we walk with you?" The tone of her voice did something to me. It was not the voice of a scared child. It was practiced, careful, like a question asked many times before. I took a step back. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. And I knew I should not say yes. I didn't answer them. I couldn't. My throat felt like it had closed up. My legs were already starting to move, carrying me slowly backward toward the truck. The two girls didn't follow right away. They just watched. Not with the curiosity of kids, but with the patience of something else. Something waiting. I climbed back into the cab and slammed the door shut, locking it out of instinct. They didn't flinch. Instead, they took a step forward together, still perfectly in sync. Then another, slow, steady, not threatening, just wrong. I turned the key in the ignition again. Nothing. The engine was still dead. I hit the horn out of desperation. It echoed once through the trees and vanished into the fog. That's when I heard the second voice. It came from the other girl, softer than the first, but just as calm. It's very cold out here. We've been walking for so long. I looked through the windshield. They had stopped again only a few feet from the bumper. Their faces were pale and expressionless. No flushed cheeks, no signs of cold. Just blank stares and the faintest hints of smiles. "Please, sir," the first one said. "Our mother will worry." I shook my head. "You need to stay where you are. I'll call for help when I have signal." The second girl tilted her head slightly. "We're not lost. We're going home." I swallowed hard and reached for my phone again. Still no bars, just a black screen that reflected my own fear. I looked up and they were closer. Right at the hood of the truck now, though I hadn't seen them move. "We don't like walking alone," the first one said. And I knew then, deep in my gut, that if I let them in the truck, I would never leave that road again. I fumbled for the flashlight in my glove box, nearly dropping it as I pushed open the door and stepped out again. My breath puffed white in the cold air, and the fog seemed even thicker now, swallowing sound and space alike. The girls were no longer standing in front of the truck. They were to my left, just a few feet away, on the shoulder, standing shoulder to shoulder with their hands at their sides. Their heads turned slowly toward me, and I finally saw their eyes. Black, not dark brown, not shadows. Just pure, inky black from lid to lid. No whites, no pupils. Just endless dark. Something in me broke loose. I ran. Down the road, away from the truck, away from them. My boots slapped the asphalt, breath ragged in my throat. I didn't hear footsteps behind me, but I knew they were coming. Not running, just following. "Sir, wait. You forgot something." Their voices floated through the fog like music on broken speakers. The tone never changed. Calm, rehearsed, patient. "You just need a ride. Please." I looked over my shoulder. They were closer than they should have been. Walking, always walking, but never slowing. No matter how fast I moved, they stayed the same distance behind me. Those eyes, that steady gaze. My chest burned. My legs screamed. I didn't know where I was going anymore, just that I had to get away. Then through the curtain of fog, I saw headlights. A truck, a big one, parked just ahead with hazard lights blinking. A man stepped out, older bearded, holding a wrench. He saw me stumbling toward him and shouted, "You all right?" I didn't answer, just pointed behind me. When he looked, the road was empty, nothing but fog and tire tracks. I collapsed against his truck, gasping, shaking. "They were right there," I whispered. "Two girls." He looked at me for a long moment, then opened the door. "You're lucky," he said quietly. "You didn't let them in. Most don't figure it out in time." He drove me down the mountain without asking more questions. I sat in silence, staring at the road behind us through the mirror, half expecting to see those girls standing in the fog, still waiting. But nothing followed us. Nothing moved. Just trees' shadows and that endless white mist. About 10 minutes into the descent, his radio crackled to life. The old kind built into the dash with a bent antenna. It hadn't made a sound until then. No music, no chatter. Just silence. But now through the static, a voice came through. Low, breathless, right against the speaker. "Don't look." That was all it said. We both froze. He reached out and turned the volume down, but the message had already ended. The silence returned. Neither of us spoke until we reached the ranger station. He dropped me off without a word and drove off into the mist. I never saw him again. But some nights when the fog rolls in thick and cold, I still hear that voice in my dreams, whispering from the edge of the trees. Don't look. Don't answer. Don't stop. Just keep driving. The Rangers found my truck the next morning parked exactly where I had left it. The engine started without issue. No mechanical failure, no explanation. They asked if I was sure I hadn't imagined it, that maybe the fog had played tricks on me. I didn't argue. Just signed the incident report and kept my story short. Cold, lost, picked up by a passing truck. But one of them came to me later when no one else was around. He looked pale, unsettled. Said he had walked the perimeter where I claimed to see the girls. Said he found something strange. Small footprints, bare feet, perfectly preserved in the soft dirt. 2 sets, walking side by side. Then one set vanished, and the other just stopped, mid-step. He didn't say anything else. Just looked at me like he wanted to believe my silence. I thanked him. Then I left Oregon and never took another mountain route again. Some roads you just don't drive twice. Story 6. The thrift store wasn't empty. I started working at Cedar Pines Thrift the summer after I dropped out of college. It was supposed to be temporary. Just a way to earn some money and keep my mind busy while I figured out what came next. The store sat at the edge of town, tucked between an abandoned church and a shuttered diner, the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked while driving past. It used to be a hunting lodge back in the 1940s. The owner liked to joke that death and secondhand goods weren't so different. Both required someone letting go. Most nights I worked alone, sorting donations, tagging prices, restocking shelves. Thursday nights were the busiest for sorting, which meant hours in the back room surrounded by boxes that smelled like mothballs and old perfume. I didn't mind the quiet. It gave me space to think, to breathe. But the building itself never quite settled. The floors creaked even when no one walked on them. The lights flickered in certain corners, no matter how many times we changed the bulbs. And the basement where we kept the furniture and overflow donations was always freezing even in the middle of July. There were rules we were supposed to follow. Say hello when entering the basement. Never work past midnight. Never answer if you heard your name but couldn't see who was calling. I thought it was just store lore. Quirky rituals passed down by bored employees. But over time, I started to notice things. Little things. Out of place. Slightly off. And I began to wonder if the thrift store really had been empty when I locked up at night. Or if something had stayed behind, waiting in the corners, watching. The first time something truly strange happened, it was subtle. I just finished tagging a box of donated baby clothes when I noticed one of the old radios on the electronics shelf had turned on by itself. No music, no voices, just static. I unplugged it, thinking maybe someone had left a battery inside. But when I opened the back, there was nothing. No power source at all. I chalked it up to faulty wiring and moved on. But after that, the weirdness started stacking. Books I knew I shelved upright would be lying face down the next morning. Lamps that were unplugged would blink faintly as I passed. I started hearing soft thuds from the stockroom, even when I was alone, always just out of view. Once I opened a donation box and found nothing inside but a single Polaroid photo of the front counter taken at night. I was in the picture. So was someone else standing in the far back of the frame, blurry and tall. I tried to laugh it off with the other employees. Lorraine, who had worked there the longest, just gave me a tired smile and said, "As long as you say goodnight, it usually leaves you alone." That's when I started noticing the mannequins. We only had 3 used to display clothes near the front window, but I began finding them in new places. The break room, the back hall, once in the locked restroom, always facing the door, always silent. I asked Lorraine if anyone was playing a joke. She just shook her head and said, "That's not the part to worry about." Still, I kept working, because whatever it was, it hadn't hurt anyone. Yet. And part of me wanted to know what else it could do. It all started to center around one object, a mirror. Oval-shaped vintage brass frame with fine floral etching curling around the edges. It arrived in a plain donation box with no label, no note, no context. I remember unwrapping it and catching my reflection, only it wasn't quite right. There was something about the glass, something too dark in the way it held the image. The air behind me had looked still, but my reflection seemed to shift ever so slightly, as if someone was moving just out of view. I put it in the back for processing, but every night after that, I'd find it propped up somewhere new. Once it was leaning against the exit door. Another time, it sat on the checkout counter, facing the front entrance. I asked Lorraine if she kept moving it. She didn't even flinch when she said, "Don't look too long. That thing remembers." I started paying attention. The temperature near the mirror always dropped noticeably colder than the rest of the room. Items placed near it would fall over on their own, even if they were perfectly balanced. One night I stood in front of it for longer than I should have. At first it was just my reflection. Then slowly the room behind me grew darker in the glass. The lights dimmed in the reflection, but not in the room. And then I saw her. A woman, pale skin, black dress. She stood behind my shoulder, head tilted at an unnatural angle, her eyes wide but empty, not blinking, just staring. I spun around. No one was there. From that night on, I stopped cleaning the mirror. I stopped moving it. I avoided that corner of the store altogether. But it didn't matter. Wherever I went, the mirror found its way back. It was always closer than I remembered leaving it, always facing me. And the worst part wasn't the reflection. It was what I started hearing when I passed it. A whisper, low and careful, saying my name. I tried to tell myself it was just stress, that I was tired, overworked, letting the ghost stories and creaky floorboards get to me. But the mirror was no longer content with whispers. Things started happening when I wasn't even near it. I would walk into the store and find lights flickering in rapid bursts, as if someone were flipping the switch over and over again. The radios would buzz with static no matter how many times I unplugged them. Once a row of porcelain dolls from the toy section fell from the shelf one by one, as if nudged by invisible hands. Their glass eyes never stopped staring. Lorraine quit without warning. She left a single sticky note on the staff fridge that read, "I gave it 3 years. That's longer than most." That night I worked alone. I was too stubborn to leave. Maybe too curious. Maybe I needed to know what would happen if I stayed. It was close to midnight when I heard it. A heavy dragging sound from the basement. At first, I thought someone had broken in, so I grabbed the flashlight and crept downstairs. The basement was ice cold. Colder than usual. I could see my breath. The mirror was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs. Standing upright in the middle of the room. No support, no hook. Just there. And this time, the reflection didn't match the room. In the glass, the store was empty and dark, but I could see movement. Shelves tipping over, hangers swaying. The mannequins weren't where they were supposed to be. They were closer, their heads tilted toward the mirror. I reached out, drawn in like gravity. My fingertips brushed the glass, and it felt warm. Then I saw her again, the woman in black. She was behind me in the reflection, but when I turned, she was nowhere. Yet her breath was on my neck. I stumbled backward. The mirror didn't fall. It followed. I left the store that night and never went back. I didn't even collect my last paycheck. Some things don't want to be sold. They want to be seen. Over and over again. A week after I quit, I got a call from my mother. She had been cleaning out the attic and found a box of old photos. She thought I might want them. I stopped by to pick it up, still jumpy from everything that had happened. I didn't expect anything more than dusty family snapshots. But tucked between vacation pictures and birthdays was a photo I had never seen. It was black and white, slightly faded, showing a small storefront Cedar Pines Thrift decades ago. In front stood 3 people. One of them was my grandmother. The other 2 were strangers, except the woman on the left looked familiar. Pale, tall, black dress. I stared at the photo, heart racing. My mom said the woman used to work there in the 40s, when it was still the hunting lodge. She died in the basement during a fire. They never recovered her body. And apparently, according to local stories, she used to stand by the old mirror to greet customers. The same mirror that kept finding me. That's when I realized I hadn't found the haunted object. It had found its way back to me. Through blood, through time, through memory. I tried to forget it all. Took a new job in a neighboring town. Kept busy. Told myself it was over. But late one evening, just before closing, I walked past the front window of the small bookstore where I worked. Something in the reflection made me stop. There across the street in the pawn shop window was a familiar shape. Brass frame, oval mirror, floral etchings. It was angled slightly toward the street as if watching. I went outside, crossed the road, and peered through the glass. The mirror was there, propped among old lamps and vinyl records. But my reflection didn't match. In the mirror, I was standing still, even though I had taken a step back. And behind me, just over my shoulder, a pale face hovered, lips close to my ear. I spun around. Nothing. But the whisper returned. It said my name, just like before. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.